Welcome and good evening to the second in our parent and caregiver series, sponsored by the School of Social Service Administration and the Urban Education Institute. My name is Dwayne Davis. I'm the Executive Director of K-12 Education Initiatives at the University of Chicago. And welcome to again, second session in the series. At the end of the session, we'll be listing our additional sessions that are coming up. This is a very timely session, and I'm going to say a very personal session. I currently living with a high school senior who is doing senior year in CPS from home and doing his college applications from home with his father and his mother, who are both educators. So it is, for him, probably the worst of all possible circumstances, given that particular circumstance as a young person attempting to apply to college and navigate that process at home. So this is a timely session because there are a set of possible applications, scholarship applications coming due in the coming week, likely in this coming weekend. So that's very important. We want to make sure that we uplifted this, had this timely session, and also then had this recording that you can share with friends, families, grandmothers, aunties, people across the country. We will have some Chicago specific things as examples, but in general, all of our professionals on our panel are here to kind of give that big picture view, and not just for seniors, also for anyone in high school that is starting that journey and starting to think about that work as well. So before I start sharing my screen and we start the presentation, there's a couple of things you might have already heard. The session is going to be recorded. I've mentioned it a couple of times, but just so you're aware. Next, and I mentioned this already too, a copy of the recording will be sent out to everyone. We have our other set of sessions that we did for teachers, but also for families that we did in August and September available on the Urban Education Institute YouTube page. And lastly, this will be interactive. There will be some moments where we're going to ask some questions. We're going to deploy a survey in a moment, and there'll also be some reflection questions that are actually asked in the presentations of our panelists. So be ready to answer in the chat if you're ready, willing, and able. And if there's a burning question that you want to ask, we've got 15 minutes at the end where there'll be a Q&A session where we can answer those questions from the members of our panel. So what we like to do now is deploy our first poll. I'm going to start sharing my screen. And so as the poll is up, we have it from strongly agree to strongly disagree. There are about 5 questions, and you can take your time answering those questions while I introduce our panel. And so our panel, we have an esteemed group of colleagues that have experience, not just in the city of Chicago, but nationally as far as college attainment is concerned. So first, Yesenia Olvera, who is a former colleague of mine. We worked at a CPS high school together. She's at Juarez Community Academy High School, which is also a partner in a network school as part of the Network for College Success in the city of Chicago, which has done groundbreaking work on freshmen on track, but also on post-secondary work. And they also do work in literacy in high schools as well in the city and also nationally. Next, we have Cora Johnson, who is from the Kenwood Academy. Not only is she a person that currently works at Kenwood Academy, but actually wears her big KA sweatshirt. She is a Kenwood alum. And we're happy to have Cora Johnson here to be a presenter, and also Kenwood is part of the Network for College Success. We have the Deputy Director of Admissions, Veronica Hawad. She has either already entered the session and she'll be speaking, she'll be the third speaker tonight, but she has spent some time today at the Chicago Scholars on-site event, which is happening virtually, where young people are getting admitted to college right now as we speak, speaking to college admissions officers and doing that work with our first generation communities in our city. And last, we have the chief college officer from the University of Chicago Charter Schools, and the University of Chicago Charter High School Woodlawn campus is also a Network for College Success partner. We have Will Torres. Will J. Torres, WJT, kind of finishing us up this evening. So if you haven't got a chance to answer the poll, please do. We'll leave it up. We'll let it go for a couple more minutes while you navigate that poll. And I am going to hand it over to our two esteemed colleagues from Juarez and Kenwood, Yesenia Olvera and Cora Johnson.
Thank you so much, Dwayne. Hi, everyone. I'm Yesenia Olvera. I am the college and career coach from Juarez, and I am excited to go ahead and begin the presentation by giving a little explanation in regards to the college application process can happen as early as freshman year at the high school level. And so one of the things that I did here is kind of just break it down of things that students and families can do together to kind of begin that conversation. So freshman year, if you are currently working with a freshman or you are a freshman at the high school level, you're going to notice that grades and attendance are on the top of everything on here for every grade, just because it's just one of the things that we always talk about with the Network for College Success is that grades and attendance are a huge indicator to access to college or universities, especially very selected colleges and universities. Just for an example, the University of Chicago, who is a partner university with us, it's just pretty much shows that students who have really good attendance and grades just can be very successful. Another note that I always emphasize with freshmen, and again with all students, is that get to know support staff at your school. And one of the most important people are your counselors and side people like myself, college and career coaches and teachers, especially if your students have a senior seminar teacher that helps them with college applications or navigating the college experience. Definitely those are your biggest supporters in the school. I know some of you may feel that I like in the poll, maybe scared or afraid to reach out to an adult in the building, but I definitely do think that they are there to answer any questions, especially in the virtual world. Many of our counselors, especially at Benito Juarez, our counselors are doing an amazing job with creating virtual one-on-one sessions. And so they want to make sure that your students are not left behind. Another thing that I tell my freshmen is to definitely get involved. Freshman year is the same thing with college. Any start of freshman year is a really good way to kind of explore your identity, explore what you like, what you're good at. And that kind of goes hand in hand to another bullet point of exploring your strengths and career interests. Many students oftentimes, this is a crucial moment to see if art is their thing, if playing sports is their thing. Maybe swimming was never a thing back in 8th grade, but now that pool looks pretty comfortable, right? Given the restrictions that are happening with our current pandemic, many high schools are taking precautions with how students are getting involved. Benito Juarez actually is partnered with many community organizations around our neighborhood that are providing extracurricular opportunities for our students to volunteer remotely, whether it is Zooming with the elderly to kind of say hi, cheer them on, and especially because many of their families can't visit them in person, that's just a really good way to kind of get involved. Another thing is to consider your summer plans and internship or employment programs. This is also a really good time to start thinking about what you want to do your summer. I know right now, if you're living in Chicago with me right now and you see that snow, you're probably far away from thinking about summer. I always like to think a little bit ahead, like what am I going to do for spring break or even summer break? But if you are a freshman, again, this is a really good time to start thinking about your possibilities of how you want to utilize summer instead of just catching up on TV shows, that's a side thing. Sophomore year, again, attendance, they're always important, and grades. So make sure that you are keeping up with that. And one of the things I often tell students is this is also a really good time to start enrolling to those advanced honor level courses. Again, if your school it offers them, it's always a good opportunity to see how you can get into those. My school offers dual enrollment. So it's a really good way for students to take those college level courses, whether it's English or math at the community college. And eventually, if they pass and get that A, they can transfer those credits to a university, and something that they don't have to take again, and they don't have to pay out of their own pocket. Explore internships and jobs. And one of the things here is a good, when students finally have a GPA, it's always a good indicator to start exploring your college options. And I know one of my colleagues is going to talk a little bit more about visiting college campuses virtually, and that's always, trust me, it's out there, and there's many websites out there that have created tools for students and families to visit campuses virtually. And I know some of them work like Google Maps, and so it's pretty awesome. You all should do that. Junior year is an emphasis on the SAT. So, and I also put that on sophomore year just because it's always good to start practicing for standardized testing. In Illinois, we generally take the SAT. So I always often refer my students to Khan Academy, which it's really nifty. As students start practicing, Khan Academy starts generating more practice questions, specifically where in the areas where students need a little bit more help in. Junior year is also a really good time to start financially planning for college. Having those conversations around what is affordable, and even creating a savings plan. If you have a freshman student or an 8th grader, start saving $1 a day, and trust me, that adds up to the end of college years. Junior students, this is a time to start working on that personal statement and start writing about yourself, thinking about what makes you strong. Many colleges and representatives, unfortunately, may not be able to meet you in person, but the personal statement or personal narrative is a really good way to start knowing who you are on a personal level, aside from all your extracurricular activities and so forth. And if you haven't already done so, junior year, it's a good time to start meeting with your school counselor to discuss your post-secondary options. It's always good to at least meet with them before the end of the school year, junior year. That way, you know them, and 2, get to know the person that will be sending those transcripts and letters of recommendations on your behalf. Senior year. So if you have a current senior like Mr. Dwayne, it's always important to make sure that the student is on track to graduate and retaking the SAT or ACT if needed. But unfortunately, like in Illinois, many testing opportunities are not available for our students. So just keeping that in mind. But if in the future things open up, it's always a good opportunity as well. And if you haven't already done so, if your student is eligible, please complete the Fafsa as soon as possible. If you are in a state like ours in Illinois, we have what's called the MAP grant. And students who are in Illinois, that's a first come, first serve basis grant. So we want to make sure our students are completing that on time. Apply early action. And I know all my colleagues are going to emphasize a little bit about this, but that's very important. And then when admitted, just review all your offer letters. So here I put, what if my student is a current senior and they haven't done anything? Trust me, I work with some 400 plus seniors. You have those students who already submitted 20 college applications because they're in Chicago Scholars. And then you have the other end of students who, it's okay. I always tell my students, you know what? The fact that you're having a conversation or you're taking the time to talk about your plans right now, whether it's a Zoom meeting like this one, that's okay. Let's begin. So the first one, it's never too late checklist. I always tell students, set a virtual meeting. Well, in this case, it's going to be virtual. Set a meeting with your counselor or college and career coach and set up a game plan. Under here, talk about whether you're on track to graduate. Just first making sure, hey, are you taking those credits that you need? And then from then, create deadlines for yourself. Set goals when you should complete tasks. And that's about writing your personal statement, reaching out to teachers to write your letter of recommendation, if not your employer or any other mentor. And then just ask about systems of requesting transcripts and letters of recommendations. Oftentimes, students and families think it's just an email sent and it's going to get done. Unfortunately, that's not right. But please make sure you check with the school counselor and teachers about a specific system that they want you to follow specifically for those transcripts or letters of recommendations. And then after you, for creating your list, I tell students as soon as you start creating a list of colleges and universities you intend to apply or are interested in, determine what major you want to consider. Oftentimes students are in between 2 or 3, and that's perfectly okay. Don't limit yourself to just 1 or 2 majors. Definitely keep options open. And like, for example, we have a University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign that allows students to kind of pick 2 majors just in case, and that they would like to be considered for. And then determine which deadlines you need to prioritize. So if a college or university offers really great financial aid packages, prioritize those early actions. And then those colleges, universities that have a little leg room with regular applications, and those colleges, universities that fills up their spots up to, has the application open up to until they fill up the spots, which are rolling. When you're exploring your college options, please reach out to college representatives. They are there to support you and answer any questions that you may have, especially if you are a student. They are the ones with the ins and outs, and I'm pretty sure my colleague Veronica is going to tell you about that. And she answers all the questions my students may have directly. So your counselor may not know it, but I'm pretty sure your representative will be able to answer any question. Join virtual family informational sessions or open houses. So if you're on here right now, you're pretty much one step ahead. But definitely many colleges, universities, and even at your high school, they may be offering parent nights and workshops. Definitely join those. A lot of information is always shared there. Virtually visit those campuses. I'm always emphasizing, yes, right now we may not be able to join them personally, but please do so virtually. You may be able to see, hey, I don't like how this school looks. Well, I never say judge a book by its cover, but sometimes, you know, you want to make sure you at least explore it one way or another. And just explore the admissions pages of each application requirement. I think this is an important point. Many students, again, often say, hey, what do I send my test scores? Do I send letters of recommendations? Hey, your best friend is the website. That's where you can get it in. Lastly, finances. Again, if you haven't had this conversation, start discussing about family finances. Be honest with each other. What can be paid out of pocket, not just for 1 month, but yearly, even daily, especially if you are a parent with a senior and who will be a freshman college student next year. Please be honest with them. Tell them what you can afford, whether it's books, supplies, or even just housing and meals. Be honest. The more honest you are, the more it motivates your students to start getting on those scholarship opportunities and just applying, right? Completing the Fafsa, one way to know whether or not you have access to certain funds is the Fafsa. And then search for any scholarships. There are many scholarships, private, local, so forth, many organizations out there willing to give our students money. And oftentimes I hear from many organizations, hey, kids are not applying, money's going to waste. Don't let it go to waste, use it up. And meet with financial aid offices, especially if you are a student, just meet with them virtually if you can. Again, just making sure to review that they have access to your FAFSA if you completed it, and you don't have any pending documents with them. And just at the end, make sure that if you are accepted to many various colleges and universities, review all offer letters after being admitted, and just make sure that you are accepting the college or university of your choice that also is financially fit for you.
Thank you. Thank you, Yesenia. I actually can't see the slide on my computer, so I'm looking at the slides from my screen. So I'll just say next when I'm moving forward. But Yesenia did an excellent job going over some of those tasks that are required throughout our students' senior year and even leading up to senior year. Just to restate, I am Miss Johnson, Miss Cora Johnson. I work at Kenwood Academy as a college and career resource coordinator. And so when we're thinking about like the planning process, that's a lot. even though that's very good information, it still is a lot. And when we think about our students, specifically now in the middle of a pandemic and being away from their friends, we also think about some of the supports that are needed throughout the parenting while planning process. You know, it can be very stressful, not only for students, but also for parents who are constantly looking for resources. And a quote that I came across that I felt like directly related to this specific relationship was, "What's around the seed will eventually determine if what's in the seed will come out and grow." And so to me, that just means, what are you surrounding your children by? What kind of energy are you giving your children when you come to asking about college, or, you know, what they specifically want to do after high school? And so in thinking about what your child is surrounded by, we also have to think about, you know, when we're creating a game plan or exploring college and career options and understanding finances, what kind of support does your student need? When I think about plants, I think about an array of plants. There's a multitude of different plants, and not every plant needs the same support. I try to water my mint plant the same way that I water my cactus, and that is the reason why it is dead. So as parents, we just need to be observant of our students, and then also recognize that in each season plants change. So what changes are your students making in each season? Do they still want to be a teacher? Do they still want to be a doctor? Has that changed? It's important that you surround your student with a healthy environment that makes them feel comfortable and open to communicating any changes that they're going through, because this is going to be crucial when your student is going to talk to their counselor, and their counselor is coming back to talk to you. We just want to make sure that everybody is on the same page, because that just makes it easier for the student to plan and get to whichever goal that it is that they're trying to achieve. And I'm moving on to the next slide. So as stated, I believe personally that parents are an integral part in the planning for college process. It just is what it is. Teachers and staff and counselors can do all that they need to do, but if students go home and they don't have support systems or guidance at home, it will be more difficult for that student to attain success ultimately. And so when I'm thinking about that relationship, I think about two words. I think about guidance and alliance. And I think that those two words are basically explain the planning process. And I have the Incredibles here because, one, everybody has a special skill. Jack is not going to try to run through a brick wall like his dad because he doesn't have super strength. He can catch on fire, but he doesn't have super strength. So when you're thinking about your relationship with your students, you want to also identify their skill set. I'm very close to the work, but I'm also not far from the work. I'll be having my 10-year class reunion this year, and I remember going through the college process, and I remember, you know, my mom utilizing her strengths, and I remember communicating what I was interested in. And so in that way, we were able to tackle more tasks because I was able to do what I needed to do, but I can also acknowledge, you know, my mother's strengths and how she could help me. So the first thing that you want to do in guidance is identify not only your strengths as a parent, but identify your students' strengths. You raise them, you put them in good school systems so that they can grow and have good skill sets. This is the opportunity for you to trust them with that. Also, acknowledge how these skill sets can help resolve the problem. So the problem at hand is that your student wants to go to college and they have not decided on one school. How can each skill set help you resolve the problem? It's very simple. And then lastly, the alliance piece. I know that high school students can be very interesting to work with sometimes. So always be, or try to be, as open-minded as possible to the success of your child's vision or dream. Recently, we've seen like careers take off in areas that we could have never imagined because of social media. There are so many different career opportunities that are being introduced and they're not typical or the norm, as we would say, is not the typical 9 to 5. So your student may have seen something or been exposed to something that has, you know, awakened a dream in them that doesn't sound like something that you've heard before. But always be welcoming and open to listening to your child and their ideas, because you may be able to guide them in tailoring it for a specific college or university, or you may be able to guide them towards a major that may support that idea or vision or dream. But if you just if you close down or shut down to it, then your student will stop sharing information with you. So 2 words, guidance and alliance, lead to open communication. And open communication has the ability to increase support, resources, and opportunities in career exploration, because now you are a team. And 1 is typically better, I mean, 2 is typically better than 1, because more eyes and ears open you up to more resources. So when you get to some of those resources, I'm moving on to the next slide, you'll find support and opportunities for career exploration, you know, whether it be from a counselor or online website. There are a multitude of ways that you can come about resources, but 2 ways are, the first one being district-wide programs. So for those of you who are Chicago Public School parents, Chicago Public Schools partners with Naviance. And Naviance is a database that will allow your students to explore careers, explore their interests, and also just explore colleges and add them onto one database so that they can refer back to it later. And I think that websites like these that build and store student profiles and resumes and help assist them throughout, you know, picking a major and deciding on careers are essential throughout the process, because we have to reflect on, you know, our thought process when we were 17. And the reality is that I had no idea what I wanted to be when I was 17. I thought I knew what I wanted to be, but it's very easy for that idea to change. So the more options that we give our students and the more that they get to explore, the more that they get to narrow down or store information for later, so that if they do get lost along the way, they always have a resource to refer back to. And so if your student is not on Naviance and doesn't have access to those career options and those colleges and universities through Naviance, another program that I started using when I first got into the work was College Board. And so there's Big Future / College Board. The link is embedded in this slide. It's also another site that will allow for your students to insert information regarding like their interests and, you know, extracurricular activities, and if they want to go to a big school or a small school, a public or a private. And it really tailors the schools based off of your students' interest in careers, but also their interest in environment. And so when we're thinking about colleges and universities, we always have to be sure that we're connecting the two, environment and interest, so that our students can succeed. So if your school does not have a system like Naviance, I do suggest College Board. This is also where your student will log in to view their SAT score and any other additional information in regards to testing.
Thank you, Cora and Yesenia. And we're now moving to our third panelist, Veronica.
Hello, everyone. My name is Veronica. I work in the college admissions office here at the University of Chicago. Prior to that, I worked in the college admissions office at the college I attended. I'm from Chicago, but I went and lived in Ohio for well over a decade. I went to Kenyon, which is a small liberal arts college for undergrad. I went to Ohio State for my master's, and then I came back to Chicago and started working at the University of Chicago. So I agree with so much of what Cora and Yesenia have already said. They've given us great advice about getting students to this point where they're applying to colleges. So I want to just give you a little perspective from the college admissions counselor side, so the staff member who actually receives those applications. I want to talk a little bit first about the college search and how we're going to navigate, at least for right now, what are virtual college visits. We've already seen some great resources about learning about colleges, about careers. There's lots out there in terms of search. I will also say colleges are doing their part to make sure that you have information from us on what our colleges are like. Some students already know this. They're probably getting inundated with emails from our schools. Read some of them, right? At the very least, keep them, save them later in like a college folder so that if anything comes up, you can go back to them later. There are a lot of official ways to get information. Those are valid, those are useful, and you should be using them. But I'm a big fan of finding more unofficial sources as well. Unofficial in that they're not coming from like my admissions office or a high school counseling office. So think through what peers might be able to tell you, for example, through social media. So many college admissions offices, many colleges and universities in general, will have different social media accounts. And there are big differences in, what they share, what they choose to share, how they speak to their audience. Think about that. Like, look at the college's social media accounts. Most colleges now have their student newspaper available completely online. So you can see versions of that every week at most colleges that you're applying to. Those are really great things to read. They tell you a lot about the current issues as students see them at their schools. So I would encourage you to, yes, go through all official channels, right? Everything your high school counselor, post-secondary coach shows you, everything we show you on the admissions side, but don't hesitate to veer off the path just a little bit and look at other sources. In a normal year, I would be really excited to tell you about all the cool things that colleges do to set you up to be able to do visits in their campus. Many colleges that are out of state will offer students special fly-in or bus-in programs. That is how I saw college when I was a student. I'm a first-generation student. My parents don't have college degrees. I was on a significant amount of financial aid when I went to college. And this was the only way really that I would have seen schools outside of Illinois. So oftentimes colleges will have in the spring and summer, sometimes in the fall, opportunities for students to apply for these cool fly-in and bus-in programs. And if you are accepted to these programs, the school will pay to bus you or fly you out to visit their campus. Clearly this year, colleges were really sad to not be able to do that. It just wasn't safe to have students traveling to and from our campuses. Many schools did offer virtual versions of their fly-in programs, and I suspect that will continue throughout this year. So for any school that you might be interested in, you're getting emails from them or if you've heard about them, they may not be doing an on-campus program right now, but they're usually still offering really cool virtual options on their website. You can find them, you can sign up. Many schools also have really great summer programs, some where the cost is totally covered for the student participating. We have several at UChicago. The schools I went to have several, right? All different schools have summer programs. Again, this past year, many colleges had to pivot and turn their summer programs into virtual summer programs. They didn't really happen on most college campuses. We don't yet know. It's too early to know what summer 2021 will look like, but I think a lot of schools are preparing for another virtual summer. What will happen if we need to do another set of virtual summer programs? Those are still valuable programs. You still learn a lot about the school. In some cases, doing a summer program does influence admission. So there are a handful of special scholarship programs at UChicago that if you do them, you work very intimately with the admissions office staff. We get to learn who you are. That tells us whether or not a student is a good fit for the institution. And hey, we remember that name and person when we read their application. Again, it's a little bit weird this year to be thinking about these programs and not being able to physically get to campus, but you are getting a lot of good info from the colleges on what still exists on that campus, what students are like, what supports those colleges have. So I highly suggest you still look into those options. Now that is beneficial in multiple ways. I think you should be participating and attending virtual college programs as much as possible. Even though it's tough, even though we're spending all day on screens, I know it's a lot to add. But I want to tell you a little bit about this thing called demonstrated interest. So many, but not all, many colleges in the nation track a student's demonstrated interest. What that means is that any time that you have contact with that office, they save a note, they make a little note of that contact. And then eventually, if you apply to the college, they have this history of points of contact with you as a student. So the school I used to work for did this, and I got an email from a student, I would put it in a future file. If I got a call from a student or their family, I would put it in a future file. If I met them at a college fair or a visit to their high school, I would put that in their file. And lo and behold, one day when they applied, I had all these points of contact with that student. So that told me that the student, was really working hard. They were thinking critically about this process. They were asking questions. Maybe they were interested in my particular school because they were asking me questions. That history of demonstrated interest can sometimes affect an admissions decision, right? So some colleges have a long history of contact with students. That's normal. And then sometimes they will have a student apply the day of a deadline and they've never heard of that student before. That can also be normal. In some schools, the advantage goes, all things equal, to the student that has been in contact with the college, not the student that just appeared on your doorstep the day you were admitted. So when you have questions, you want to turn to the admissions office that you are, interested in, the school you'll be applying to. I'll talk about how to find your admissions counselor at that school in just a moment. But just know that, yes, we acknowledge that it's a little bit harder to conduct your college search process right now. We don't have college visits in the way we used to, but there are plenty of virtual programs. They're still really high quality, and I would still encourage students to take part in them. There are still lots of great benefits to you to learn about a school, and then to us to learn about you. In terms of what you submit when you apply to a college, there are a couple key pieces. Not all schools require all pieces, but I want to go over a couple important pieces with you. So pretty much everyone has a main application, right? This is the basis of an application to a college. They have some kind of application, whether it's through a partner like the Common application, maybe the Coalition application. Some colleges have their own university or college applications, but there's always this main app that you have to do. In those applications, there is space for student information, family information. You often get to list some of the cool things you do in your spare time, whether it's clubs at school, things at home with your family, things that you just like to do on your own. There is not always, but usually an essay in that application, some kind of main personal statement where you have to tell us a little bit about who you are and what you really care about. And then some colleges like UChicago give you the opportunity to write additional essays. That's called a supplement to an application. So you will find that most colleges you're applying to have a main application. It may be sponsored by a partnership with the Common app, the Coalition app. It may be the school has built their own application. But in any case, that's the main piece. There will usually be an essay in that application, but not always. Some schools don't require an essay. The other thing that is pretty common to be asked for in the application process is some version of your high school transcript. College admissions counselors want to see where you go to school, what that means for what classes you have available to you, what your performance looks like over time, right? Grades over time. So there's a lot to unpack in the transcript. It's a very important part of the application. Some schools will have you send it officially from your high school. So there's usually a process by way you request that your transcript be sent from your high school to a college. Some schools will let you self-report your transcript. So you can upload an unofficial copy of your classes, of your grades to that college application. And then some schools also have you just in their main application, write out for every year that you're in high school, all of the classes and grades that you got. If that's ever the case, if you're applying to a college where you are writing your classes and grades into the application, make sure you are looking carefully, right? They expect you to be able to say very clearly and correctly the classes and the grades. If there are any mistakes, that can make your application void. It's no longer good because you didn't give them accurate information. Sometimes some schools in normal years will give you the opportunity to submit standardized testing, usually in the form of the ACT or the SAT. This year's a little bit different. If you have heard any of the news about testing at colleges, you'll know that many colleges are choosing to go test optional this year. Because of the pandemic, many seniors have not been able to sit for an SAT or ACT test. And there's no telling that some of them will be able to before their college deadlines come up, some in the next week, some in the next 2 to 3 months. So just know that in a normal year, a student may have taken a test, ACT, SAT, sometimes both. And for some colleges, they'll get to decide whether or not they're going to send test scores in. In a normal circumstance, there are many schools that are permanently test optional. Right now, the case is many schools are acknowledging that students don't have test scores, and that's normal. So they have gone test optional at least this year, some schools for the next 2 to 3 years. And if you haven't had the chance to take ACT or SAT tests, that's fine. You won't have to submit those scores. Some, but not all colleges want you to send in recommendations or evaluations from adults who know you well. Usually those are teacher recommendations. They are looking for teachers who have taught you ideally in high school and ideally in a core academic subject. So for example, if your coach taught gym and PE, that wouldn't be an academic subject, right? They know you in your athletic, your extracurricular capacity, and then gym or PE is important, but it's not an academic subject. So usually you will see colleges that make these kind of requests asking for academic high school teacher recommendations. There's usually a process through your high school of how you request those as well. And you want to give those teachers as much time as possible to write out an awesome recommendation to show us just how wonderful you are. So don't sneak that request up on a teacher at the last minute. They're very busy people, especially right now. You want to give them that time to write you a recommendation. Some colleges offer interviews, not all. If the school is very big or very selective, they may not be able to offer you an interview. But some schools will give you that option, and some schools will invite you to do an interview. Some schools require you to do an audition or interview as part of their process. So this you'll have to check by college that you're applying to. I was talking to some of our other great hosts today, and we were talking about the fact that sometimes college admissions counselors can be a little, unclear. A school might say, interviews are not required, they are optional, right? Optional is the secret word. When something is optional, if you have it and you can do well there, it might help you, right? So I often tell students, if a college you're really interested in is offering interviews to students, right now they could be over the phone, they could be over Zoom, they could be virtual. If you're comfortable talking to new people, if you've done some research about that college, if they give you the opportunity to interview, that could be exciting stuff. You can make that request. If the school has an optional interview and you don't know a lot about them yet, or you're not exactly comfortable talking to a new person, you don't have to do it. That's fine. But just check and make sure. Do they have interviews? If they do, what's the option? What's recommended? Would I do it and do well? Every once in a while, a college will add additional materials they want to see if you're applying for scholarship. Sometimes it's not extra materials, but it's a different deadline. And they say to be considered for merit scholarship, please send in these materials by this earlier scholarship deadline. Or sometimes they could want something extra. They may want an extra essay. They may want that extra interview or an audition or some kind of example of your work and talent. Keep an eye on that. You don't want to miss out on great merit scholarship opportunities just because you missed a deadline or missed to write one simple essay. So these are all of the things that in some way or another, you're going to see many colleges ask you to submit as part of your application. Let's go to the next slide. Ooh, okay, financial aid. So these are just some important terms that I really wanted us to all talk about today. When we get into Q&A, I'm happy to answer some more of those as well as the other hosts, my other colleagues. There are two different kinds of money that schools give out, right? There's need-based financial aid and there's merit-based scholarship. So need-based financial aid is the state, federal, or school-based funding that a college gives to a family because that family needs help covering the costs of attending that college. This is based on family income, other assets, right? This is an assessment of need. What money is coming into the house, what needs to go out to cover the cost of college, what does the college really need to help you with? Which is different than merit-based scholarship. Merit-based scholarship at most schools is based on student talent, student achievements. Those things are not usually related to income. So that means that some families will get both. Some families will get one or the other, but they're different kinds of money. So need-based financial aid is based on what a family makes and owns and earns, what they need after what's left over to cover the cost of college. It is an income, salary, and assets-based assessment. Merit scholarship is based on the student. What have they achieved in and out of the classroom? So what can we award them or honor them for the work that they do? Two different kinds of money. Pretty much all of the schools that you're looking at have some kind of need-based financial aid. Not all schools have merit-based scholarship. And like I said, the ones that do have very different rules for how you can qualify for merit. Keep an eye on that, that's important. Very few schools in the nation are need blind. So UChicago is a great example of that. We're really, really lucky we can do that. When a school is need blind, that means that they have a very generous financial aid and merit scholarship budget, and they can admit students regardless of the students and families' financial need. That's a real blessing. You don't get to do that at most schools. At nearly all other schools in the nation, they practice what is called need-sensitive or need-aware admissions. Just like individuals, colleges have budgets and they can't overspend their financial aid or scholarship budget. So they have to make really tough decisions about which students they're admitting and which students they're giving money to. Just know that that's part of the process, but also know that that doesn't keep you out of college. There are great schools all across the nation that, yes, have to work within a budget. That's their reality. But when you wow them with the things that you're doing in and out of the classroom, with the quality of person that you are, with the things you want to do in your future, they can choose to admit you and give you some of the precious money that they have under their budget. The best schools to have on your list, at least a couple of schools, might meet what they call 100% or full demonstrated need. So this again is a little rare, but it's nice to have a couple schools on your list that might do this. This means that when families fill out financial aid forms, when they're applying for need-based financial aid, the college financial aid officers will calculate all of that work, and they will know at the end how much a family needs to help cover the cost of attending that college. Some families need complete costs. They need every single dollar. They don't have anything left over for college. Some families, it's a split. The college will pay some and the family will pay some. Some families don't qualify for financial aid. They make more than enough money that they have the money left over to pay to send a student to college. So there's a wide variety here. But at a school that meets 100% or full demonstrated need, when they know how much you need, they can fill that whole amount with financial aid. There's usually going to be some loan there. That's very common. You have anywhere from $3,000, $5,000, $6,000 or up per year at a college, and you're expected to take those loans out and then after graduation, pay those off. There's also grant-based money. That's gift money that doesn't have to be paid back. So just when you're building out your list, you should always check, like look at the school. Do they meet 100% or full demonstrated need? Not all schools do, but it's nice to have a couple schools on your list that do this. Those are often the schools that if you can get admitted, they might have some of the best financial aid packages. When I get asked about college cost, students and families often ask me, what is tuition? What is tuition at UChicago? What is tuition at Kenyon? If a college is residential, meaning that your student has to live and learn on that campus, they cannot be a commuter student, you're not asking about just tuition, you need to ask about the total cost of attendance. Those are the words I want you to use. What is the total cost of attendance at your college or university? That means it's taking into account tuition to take classes, as well as the amount of room and board that it costs to live and eat on campus, and usually additional fees, like what it costs to have books each term, for example. So that is the correct way to ask that question. What is the total cost of attendance? For a residential college, that gives you the full picture. If you ask me tuition, I can tell you what tuition is, but that's not telling you the whole cost of a residential school. It's very different for schools that don't have residential expectations. In that case, yes, you may be asking just about tuition to take classes and fees to be a student, because for those schools, room and board is optional. If you have the money, you can choose to live on that campus. And if you don't, you can save that money by commuting in from home. Final definitions here. One is net price calculator. All colleges are required by law to have something called a net price calculator on their admissions or financial aid website. These are simplified financial aid forms that a family can fill out to get an estimate of what financial aid might look like at that college. Some schools look really, really expensive. You see the total cost of attendance and it looks like a lot. It looks like you could just never manage that cost. But really, for some families, if they fill out that calculator, they may see that they have very little that they will have to pay for. This is super helpful for students of all kinds, especially students who have found a school that they love, but now we have to have tough conversations in the family about what we can afford. So I highly recommend that for any school you're looking at, any school you're interested in, search on their college website for net price calculator. If you can fill that out, it'll give you an estimate. And the more accurate your data you're putting in, the more accurate your estimate will be coming out. Final definition as it applies to applying for financial aid. Prior year. This is a thing that we do in financial aid, which when we started it sounded really helpful. It's actually for most families in a normal year a really good thing. That means that when you're applying for college, you are using financial information from your family's prior year to get a financial aid estimate. It's 2 years back. So any seniors right now, you're going to start college in 2021, the fall of 2021. That means that we are assessing your parents and family members' financial information from 2019, prior, so 2 years back. In a normal year, that's awesome, right? Because what it used to be was we expected this year's financial aid information. That was really hard depending on when, how, if your family files taxes. So if you're applying and I need your info now, we may not be done with tax information now. So this felt like a good thing. And for many years, for many families, this worked out. This is going to be an exception year, I think, right? So if we think about the pandemic's effect on family socioeconomic status and issues, there are many families that we know we're working with right now. 2019 was a good year. 2020 has been a different year. So we're assessing you on 2019 financial circumstances, but your 2020 and maybe 2021 situation is very different. The only way to get ahead of that is to proactively be in conversations with financial aid offices. The rule is not going to change. Seniors applying to college this year, we're still going to look at family 2019 info. But if your family knows that 2020 and 2021 are going to be different, right? There's a difference of income coming in. There's less. A family member has lost a job. Something serious has happened. There's less money. You fill out all that 2019 info and you let those financial aid offices know, I have filled out all of the documents you've asked me to, but I want to send in additional documents or a letter. I want to give you that heads up to know that our family situation has changed and I want to show you how. So that's something to think about when we think about what is called a prior year system for applying to financial aid. Most years it works really well. This year, I think it's going to be a little bit tough. Our family situations don't look the same as they did last year for most families. I just want to review. We've already talked about many of these things, but final slide, I want to review a couple things about how the pandemic has changed the admissions process. We've already talked about campus visits. We know it's really, really difficult right now, especially for seniors. You're applying to colleges, many of them you have not been able to visit. I get it, it's difficult. You have to take advantage of the virtual visits that colleges are offering. I know it keeps you on these screens a little bit longer, but we're really giving out great info and still trying to connect students to great resources. So do the virtual campus visits whenever you can. They're all posted on all of our websites. We've already talked about financial aid, right? There's this weird process set up that this year might be a little bit tough to negotiate. Just like you can talk to great admissions counselors at colleges, you can talk to financial aid staff at colleges too, right? We usually have an email or phone number on our websites and you can reach out and ask questions. Be proactive, ask questions. You're never bothering us. We're always happy to answer those. And when it comes to financial aid, yeah, definitely those questions. We're eager to help. Many colleges ask you to write essays. I think that's a good thing when you have an opportunity to speak on your own behalf about cool things you want to share with us. This year, many applications, the Common application, the Coalition application, have built in special sections where there's an additional optional essay about the pandemic, where students can choose to write about any part of the last few months that's really had an impact in their lives, personally, academically, whatever they want to say. This is a truly optional section, and that I don't expect a student to use it if they have nothing extraordinary to say. I take myself as an example, right? If I was applying to college right now, my family financial situation hasn't changed. I'm safe, I'm working and going to school from home. I've been happy, I've been healthy, things have been okay. It's been different, but I'm all right. I probably wouldn't use that section. I don't have anything extraordinary to say, and anything I could say is probably just similar to the life of the person reading the application. Think about who the college admissions counselors are out there. They are all college educated, they are all employed, they are all making good money to work safely from home. Their lives are okay right now for the most part. So it's okay if you have nothing to share. We're really happy that you have nothing to share if that's the case. If there has been impact, it's okay to share that too. So if things have been tough at home, if remote learning has been tough, if you miss your friends, if this has been difficult, it's okay to use that section and talk about the impact of the pandemic on your life. That's totally fine. But that's where it will go. There's a special section in applications where that will go, especially if you're using big partner applications like the Common App. And then we've already talked about testing. I know others will talk about testing a little bit more. This is uncharted territory for some colleges, right? Many colleges have been test optional for years, and they've been giving students choice about whether or not they would submit tests. Do you feel like these tests are representative of your abilities? As a whole, that was the norm. This year is different. Most colleges are allowing students to apply test optional because they know they have no choice. Some students don't have test scores. Totally okay, totally normal. Just know that that's okay. That if you don't have test scores and the school says that they are test optional, they actually mean that. Final slide, I just wanted to put up an example. So this is from our website, the UChicago website. At many, not all, but many of the colleges you're applying to, there is an admissions counselor assigned to work with you specifically as an applicant. We often do this by assignments to schools in specific cities, states, and countries. So if you go to the UChicago Admissions website, this is what you would find right now for the city of Chicago. You would see my name as well as other names listed. So you could see who you need to be in contact with based on where you go to school. This is the case for lots of colleges, not all, but lots of them. You can go to their admissions website. There's usually an option for you to find some kind of map or list, or you type in your high school and it'll tell you who your admissions counselor is. There are some schools that don't do this. They don't do their work regionally, and that's fine. They'll give you a more general admissions email or phone number that you can use. But either way, don't ever hesitate to reach out, right? We're real people. We want to understand your circumstances. We want to advocate for you in the admissions process. And it is okay and encouraged to always reach out to us and ask questions. I'm one of just several people at UChicago that does this work in Chicago, but I guarantee you that at many of the schools you're applying to, you have a really great admissions counselor who is eager to work with you and answer your questions and help you through the process. Thank you all.
Thank you, Veronica. And our last panelist is Will Torres. And we're running a little over, but we have such great information for the last section of this. And I also still want to encourage everyone to drop your questions into the chat during the session. And one of our panelists, they've been chatting, they'll chat it back to me, and I'll make sure it gets out to you to answer those questions. So I'm now going to hand it over to Will J. Torres.
Thanks so much, Dwayne. If you are watching this live, thank you for sticking with us. If you're watching this on a recording, thanks for sticking with us still. I'm hooked on the old ways, and so I see folks leaving questions in the chat and really appreciate the engagement. So I have a DePaul t-shirt for you. I've got some Pepperdine sunglasses for you. And I have this Pitzer bag that I'll give away during the Q&A. Obviously, I can't physically give this to you, but do appreciate your participation and hope that you'll ask lots of questions. I'll try to be concise with my slides and not read them to you. The first bit of advice that I would give for students and families is just to take track of all of the many deadlines that you're juggling. I left a blurb there from a few websites, but I would just note that there are schools that have early action, early decision, another round of early decision, priority, and then financial aid deadlines along with merit aid deadlines. And so one school can have 5 or 6 deadlines. And so make sure you look at the financial aid website as well as the admissions website. And then to actively engage everyone, I have reflection questions throughout. And so I hope that you would indulge me. How do you track your deadlines? How does your student track their deadlines? What works for you or your student? Feel free to leave some responses in the chat. Is that Google Calendar? Is that a paper folder? Naviance? Are you using spreadsheets? How do you track your deadlines? Big Future is a great way to do that indeed. Next slide, please. Making time for making time. Just encouraging students to remember to carve out blocks of 30, 40, 90 minutes on evenings, and weekends, and free periods, just to make sure that you have time to give the requisite attention to these different items. Some things that may sneak up on students if they're applying to some of those schools that meet full demonstrated need are supplemental essays, those additional essays that ask why our institution and why you. The CSS profile, most schools that give away full demonstrated need ask for additional financial information beyond the Fafsa or the free application for federal student aid. And some students, especially those receiving substantial aid, do get flagged for verification. And so build in pockets of time for that. I also have a few pro tips for students who are just working into the process of time management. And so one is to backwards map from the moment that you'd like to apply. And so if you have a December 1st deadline, take a few steps back and see what steps you need to take between this very moment and that deadline. Another would be to set internal deadlines. And so maybe 5 or 10 days ahead of the actual deadline, and then finding accountability partners. Are there other students? Are there other adults in your life who can help keep you on track and keep you honest, and give you a nice nudge when you're slipping up? Next slide, please. Presenting your best self. I think that Veronica did a great job of covering this from the admission side, and so I won't belabor the point of demonstrated interest, but I do think that it's important to be careful and thoughtful in your correspondence. And I do want to take a moment to think about the increased impact of your qualitative aspects of your application. When you're thinking about match schools, it's usually just your grade point average, and in most years, your test scores. So thinking about what are some of the qualitative pieces of the application? And this is another opportunity for students and families to reflect and add comments. What are some of those pieces beyond the test scores and the transcript that colleges and universities might look at to determine a fit for a student? And so feel free to be active. I saw some folks leaving some reflection questions. We can move on to another slide. Are colleges actually test optional? So this is something to think about. Everybody defines test optional in a different way. And so you can actually reach out to a school and ask them how they define that. Some schools will say that they are test optional, but they require a certain grade point average or sit for a different type of exam like AP scores or a placement exam. Many schools will ask for a graded paper or writing sample. And so those are some ways that a school is technically test optional, but will still have additional requirements. Not all colleges, many hundreds of colleges have become test optional on a voluntary basis, on an experimental basis. They're piloting test optional for the first time, but not all schools are test optional. So make sure that you take a look into that and then think about, how do schools get your scores? Usually that is sent directly from the College Board or from ACT, but some will gain them from your self-reported scores on the Common App. A student will tell their own scores. Some college or some high schools transcripts actually include those. And so I just wanted to give an inside tip. I once had an admissions officer remind me that they can't unsee those scores. And so if your scores are below the average scores of a school, I would work hard and communicate with your high school to make sure that they don't accidentally give those scores, because even though they may be test optional, they can't forget the scores that they saw. I would also note that merit aid and honors colleges may still require those scores. And there are some colleges and universities that are still looking for ACT or SAT scores further down the line. I also really want to encourage people to think long-term. There are some students who I've been working with who plan to stay here in Chicago or to stay nearby. And I always challenge them to just think about where do they want to be in 3 years or in 4 years. This is a temporary condition. This is a temporary situation, and we hope to have a vaccine soon. Even if students spend a semester or an entire year learning remotely, there are going to be a normalcy to the college experience again someday. And so when people are thinking about the economy and college costs, I think that that's a very real concern. But I would ask students, and I encourage you to ask your students, the reflection question of, where do you want to be in fall 2023? Do you want to be in Ghana? That's Kwame Nkrumah University. Do you want to be interning? Do you want to be doing a semester exchange at another university in the United States? Think about where you want to be, and don't, as hard as it may be, don't get caught in this very moment. The world will reopen, college will persist as we know it, or in some version of what we've known. And I really don't want people to get caught in a moment and not explore the widest array of college options because of the pandemic. Self-advocacy. So Veronica and some of my other colleagues touched on this. The first thing I would do is remind students to do the work, ask for help, but first make sure that you've done your research, you've gone to Big Future, you've sorted your schools, you've looked up your deadlines, you've prepared for the exams, you've drafted thoughtful essays, you've brainstormed, you've done all of the groundwork. Students, if you're listening, do the work. Then make sure that you ask for help. Find mentors. Those could be peer mentors. Those could be students a year ahead of you. Those could be admissions officers or staff within your building. That could be an online community. When Veronica was mentioning fly-in programs, I've noticed that students have a great experience when they connect with other students from similar backgrounds who are looking at similar situations and institutions by way of GPA band or major interest or part of the country. And so there are great online communities that you can join beyond the walls of your school or your home during COVID. And then communicate your needs clearly. I left a little mock-up here of a letter, and I'll read it as quickly as I can. Hello, Mr. Davis. I really enjoyed your lecture on Nat Turner's Rebellion. I'm working on my outline for the paper due next week. While I'm here, I also wanted to remind you about my letter of recommendation. As you know, I'm going ED2 to UChicago. Their deadline is January 4th, and I'm hoping to submit all of my materials before December 18th when we go on winter break. I've attached my brag sheet just in case, and so forth. So you can see that this very clearly asks that probably civics or history teacher, hey, are you still working on my letter of rec? Do you need a brag sheet? Do you need a conversation with me? Do you have questions? Because while it's due January 4, I want to get it done December 18. And so communicate your needs clearly. Don't just ask for help. Let folks know exactly how they might help you. And then lastly, just following up and following through. Keep touch with your support network, like I just did with Mr. Davis and asked him to work on my letter. Talk with your counselors, talk with admissions officers. Folks like Veronica love this work. If they didn't love students, they wouldn't be in this line of work, traveling to hundreds of high schools a year in a typical year. Follow up with colleges and universities. Get a paper trail and make sure that they have your application completed. If you have a fee waiver, there are many schools who won't read your application without either that money or that fee waiver. And so confirm that they have your fee waiver from NACAC or other institutions. And then follow up with financial aid. Make sure that they received your Fafsa information. They have your student aid report and expected family contribution, CSS profile. Make sure that you got all of your pieces in ahead of the deadline. Students, families, it's your responsibility to make sure you have those. And sometimes there is a glitch in the matrix. Sometimes a counselor sends that piece and it gets caught in the internet somewhere, or sometimes a college is importing information and it gets lost. And so take a few moments to follow up with those colleges and universities to make sure that you're squared away. And then lastly, follow through. Make sure that you have an accurate and up-to-date list of missing items and attack it. Make sure that you're making progress on that process and that you are cutting down the missing pieces and ticking that off. And again, creating a paper trail, calling the school, and make sure that you share news, good news or bad, whether you got in or you did not, waitlisted, deferred. Keep the people who helped you get to that position informed as they're going to advocate for you down the stretch. And then lastly, this is old school, put into me by my family. Write thank you notes. Those could be emails, those could be tangible thank you notes, but take time to thank the folks who got you there. They will probably be writing your letters for scholarships, grad school, and internships down the road. And that's all that I have for today. I hope that caught us up on some time, and I'm eager to engage with you all in the Q&A.
Thank you, Will. And we are going to stop the screen share and ask if there are any questions. You can drop them into the chat. We did lose a few people along the way, and we've been trying to answer those chats inside of the while people were asking. Will, I do want to ask one clarifying question. You mentioned a brag sheet. Could you tell people what a brag sheet is, so people can those that don't know the lingo can know what that is? For me, I asked my son to do a resume and to have a resume to share with his teachers who were going to write his recommendations, or people he wanted to write recommendations.
Absolutely. So brag sheet is utilized by many schools. Students can create their own or find templates on the internet. A resume usually will suffice to talk about some of those achievements, but I formerly was an assistant dean of admissions, and a common critique of a letter is that it's a resume rehash. and they don't want to see that you were, in 5 different places, that you were captain of the lacrosse team. And so the brag sheet lets you dig in and share a little bit more about yourselves and talk about some of those angles and give your application more texture and fill you out as a person. And so when I was applying to college, I was a first generation high school graduate and a first generation college student as well. And so I didn't want to be reduced to a football player or a Model UN guy. So it's nice if they know that I'm Black and Mexican and that's important to me, or it's nice if they know that I have other hobbies and interests, a Boy Scout or what have you. And so a brag sheet can get at some of those values and ask specific questions and give some of those examples that talk about the time that you chimed in Mr. Davis's class and talked about Nat Turner's Rebellion and really connected ideas from another class. And so the brag sheet is something that you can do on your own. You can find on the internet, and many schools will create for you. Sorry if I was using shorthand.
Oh, it's all right. And Cora, thank you for putting a brag sheet template into the chat. This is teamwork makes the dream work. We are 15 minutes over time, but I wanted to open it up to any other questions. If anybody that has remained and hung in, we really appreciate you being with us here tonight, getting all this great information. And if you have a question, we'd invite you to drop it in the chat. And if you don't have a question, I'll give it a few minutes. I will silence myself momentarily, and we'll deploy our kind of final poll. And then I'll just point out our next sessions, but love to open it up to the group, or if there's something that Yesenia or Veronica or Will or Cora, like in that distillation, to kind of put the pieces together. If you have a final comment, if we don't see anything come up in the chat.
I think what we've all talked about tonight is staying organized and being in good communication with those who are helping you through this process. I think those are going to help you go a long way. And we saw it in all of the things that people said today. So I agree, stay organized, do the best you can to do that. Applying to college is a lot on top of a lot, right? You're already busy in your senior year. We've got lots of stuff going on socially that you care about. It's a lot on top of a lot. So staying organized will help. And yes, being in good communication with any of the people at home, at your high school, at the colleges you're applying to will help greatly as well. I love that we all kind of talked about some of those things.
I have to agree. Communication is definitely key during this time. And it's actually easier, well, not easier, I won't say easier, but it's easier to access information on databases that we can connect with. So parents, when you're thinking about your students and how they're accessing information, it might be a good suggestion to say, oh, do you follow your school social media account? Are you following CPS scholarships on Instagram? Do you follow them on Twitter? And just utilizing some of the databases that they are using on a daily basis, because regardless of, if they decide to check their email, we know that they're going to get on Instagram. We know that they're going to get on Facebook. We know they're going to use specific platforms consistently. So as guiders in, assisting them in their plan, it's just smart for us to, give them those resources that they're already using. So just keep that in mind.
Thank you, Cora. And I also add, as a parent, I'm following, once my son revealed to me his entire list, which was while we were working on this Fafsa, I added those schools to my own social media account and started following them as well, because as a parent in this current time, I also want to know how they're dealing with COVID and what that might look like for next year for students, from my particular student going to that school or thinking about that school for next year. So I'm monitoring that and thinking about that as well. But thank you, Cora, for sharing that. All right, you said?
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, additionally, I feel like sometimes certain organizations don't get mentioned. So many high schools or even universities are partnered with community organizations that are out there to support many families. I know one of the things we always struggle is, hey, my counselor or the teacher is only available during regular hours, which is totally fine, right? Everybody should be working their regular scheduled hours. Some of us just work overtime.
But definitely there's many community organizations out there that are helping families complete virtually the FAFSA, or if you're in Illinois, an undocumented student, the alternative application. One of those many organizations is like, for example, the Illinois Student Assistance Commission. We have an ISAC representative who has office hours at Benito Juarez, for example, and she is always helping our students and families on Saturdays, Sundays, you name it. And you know what? And it's very helpful. And we have other partners like BAM or WOW that are specifically for Black and Latino male and women. You know, sometimes they need a little bit of support, and their coaches are there to support them all the way as well. So many students, please use your resources. Parents, leverage those other partners as well.
I would, as a parting shot, just encourage families and students to provide as much context as possible during these trying times. The additional information space is the most underutilized piece of real estate in this whole process. Sometimes students don't mention that they pick up their 8-year-old sister to go pick up their 5-year-old sister, hustle home, change clothes, start dinner. Those are activities that should be listed on the activity list, but it's okay to remind that reader as they're getting through the Common Application of that context. Sometimes we see a dip, or in admissions, Veronica would see a dip in students' grades. And without context, it looks like a student just took their paddle out of the water. But if you mention that your house burned down, or your family had a divorce, or you got the flu and you missed 3 weeks of school, it can provide context for what would normally be regarded as blemishes. That can go along with medical conditions or certain disabilities. You don't need to disclose all forms of disability, but providing additional context can really save an application that doesn't look like the average admitted applicant. And so I really encourage folks to use the additional information space. And I wish that students, especially students from underrepresented backgrounds, especially first generation folks, would use that space more often and more effectively to shed light on all of the hurdles that they have to overcome just to complete the process, let alone to be competitive within it.